Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Nishcast. It's your boy, the Diggity Doodah Dog, Mr. Peptide Panthers, joined by the Wobbly Wildcard, and we are here to talk our way through a variety of Kiwi sporting matters. Wobbly Wildcard, is there anything in the world of sport that is really commanding your attention at this moment that you can't just shake?
Commanding my attention, that I can't shake. I don't know, not really. I've been, I think the closest thing to that would be the English Premier League having come back, and I'm very much enjoying just, I'm sure it's not the best for the old players and all that, but it's pretty nice having at least 6 out of 7 days a week there's just a Premier League game on in the morning. It's kind of just all spread out, everything's nice and accessible. I'm actually seeing, I'm not watching bulks of these games, but I'll wake up and watch 20 minutes at the end or something like that, and I'm actually getting a feel for some of these teams who I just never really watched at the start, or maybe I watched a couple games at the very beginning just to get that initial idea and then sort of fell off. I haven't watched a lot of, unless they happen to be coming around to be playing Manchester United at the time. I'm not saying I've watched a lot of Norwich City or Aston Villa or stuff like that, or even Sheffield United, a team that's been kind of interesting. I've watched them a few times recently, so that's probably the closest thing to one that I wouldn't say I can't shake it. I would say I don't want to shake it. I'm really enjoying the way it's rolling out. Yeah, again, I'm sure there's issues with player welfare and all those kind of things, but they're just trying to get the season finished so they can have an off season in between before they have to start the next one. So, yeah, there's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other with all that, but it's just bloody good for the old viewer, especially the viewer in New Zealand, because a lot of these are, because they're playing through midweek games, they're having to be night games, which means they're on at 7 o'clock in the morning over here, which is just beautiful, really. It's just a beautiful bit of timing.
That's very interesting, and I've got a thought on the Premier League, and I've got a thought on something else that's commanding my attention. We'll just give our Patreon a nice little plug here. Shout out to all our patrons supporting us, and that is the best way to support us, straight up the guts. So if you are enjoying the Nishcation, the Nishcast, and whatever bullkaka we deliver, jump on Patreon and support us there. And then we got the Monday and Friday email hitter coming straight to you, where we just go a bit off the reservation, get out of the area, go walkabouts with our writing and creative juices. So check that out, sign up there. Got a good little whānau brewing over there. The thing that's commanding my attention right now, Wildcard, again, it's the UFC, just because there was a title fight between Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns scheduled in Abu Dhabi. This is the Fight Island card. There's also Eugene Behrman, coach at City Kickboxing. He is there at the moment coaching Alex Volkanovski, who has a rematch against Max Holloway. Shout out to Eugene Behrman, stuck in Las Vegas, then went straight to Abu Dhabi, so pretty hectic couple of weeks for him. But the UFC, you'll know this quite very well, Wildcard, chaos is a ladder. And
Yeah,
that's what I've heard the term chaos mentioned a few times from UFC media folk talking about what's happened there. So Gilbert Burns drops out. He got COVID. He had to pull out against Kamaru Usman. And then Jorge Masvidal comes in. And many people believe this fight is so much better than the original scheduled fight. And that has me thinking about how you make the most in chaos. And the UFC with the pandemic, then just in a little microdose of chaos with Gilbert Burns getting COVID, the UFC through chaos, or they have used chaos as a ladder. And they just keep innovating, keep finding new ways to get it done. And sometimes that works out magically because you get a better result than what you were already dealing with. So just how they are able to move so quickly, light on their feet, getting shit done, that's pretty cool. And I just want to throw back to the Premier League. So if you're because of the disjointed season, because everything's a bit all over the show, if you're like a football fan or you're a casual sports fan in Aotearoa and you just need a bit of insight and a bit of knowledge on the style of play at the Premier League, because style of play is going to be a little theme throughout this podcast. So if you're just a Kiwi sports fan, casual vibes, or even a football fan, you just haven't been paying too much attention to the Premier League, and you want to be able to spin some yarns with your mates, you want to be able to show that you know your football and just, as Kiwi blokes do and Kiwi women like to do, chat about football and sports. How would you describe the style of play and what worked in the Premier League and what didn't work? Just some key points, talking points, key ideas for people to take forth and put their own juice, sprinkle their own little pepper on top of that.
Yeah, righto. It's sort of, it's different from club to club. You get, for example, a team like Burnley with Chris Wood, who would like to play that very sort of more traditional English style of, a lot of physicality, real organized defense, not crazy amounts of passing through the midfield, but a lot of hard work in the midfield and then crosses into the box and just being like a bit of a battering ram kind of team. That's Burnley for you, and they're very good at it too. Starting from the top, you're probably looking at, obviously, we talked about Liverpool a week ago or so, and they're going to be a very influential team over the next sort of 5 years as they become like the team that other teams are trying to copy, and they're quite high energy, a lot of they like to attack at pace, they got speed and skill up front, 3 wide attackers, that kind of thing, sort of rotating a little in the midfield. I don't know that I think their midfield is, I don't want to say this about the current champs, but I think their midfield is the weakest aspect of their unit, but obviously it functions within a whole, they're just there to facilitate those attackers, get the ball to Sadio Mane with a bit of room, get the ball to Mo Salah with a bit of room, let them attack at pace. That's the job, flow forward and support, and they're excellent at it. They've also got 2 fantastic fullbacks as well who get up and swing excellent crosses into the box and just join in with those attacks and stuff, which gives them another element. They're one of those teams as well who has a goalkeeper who's quite good with his feet. No one's as good with his feet though as as old Ederson for Manchester City, who just every week there's a miracle pass. There's one he played was it yesterday morning? I think they played Southampton, and he just it wasn't even a long ball over the top. He threaded threw about 4 defenders over about 50 meters. Just went from goalkeeper to one of their wingers, I think it was, threading a ball along the ground. It was just incredible. City are like that. City, obviously, Pep Guardiola team. They've got a very Pep Guardiola style of play. It involves a lot of passing, a lot of movement, dominating possession. There's this fascinating stuff with I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but you'll be able to find it looking it up. Pep Guardiola splits his training paddocks into different areas, so he's just got a whole bunch of extra lines and just vertical and horizontal lines going across, making it almost a little bit like a kind of warped acid trip chessboard kind of thing. And his idea is that you should never have more than 2 players in any vertical or horizontal row at a time. So this is how he spreads his team out. And you can see it when you watch them. You can see the way if a player moves into one area, another player moves out of that area to a different, just to make sure everything's spread out and there's always a couple of passing options. And they'll just crush you like that by passing the ball around so perfectly. And then other teams are a little bit different. Chelsea and Manchester United both have a similar thing going on where they're a lot of young players trying to play with a lot of energy, trying to sort of facilitate those young guys on attack. Guys like Rashford, Pulisic, and United have found a bit of another level recently, getting Pogba back from injury and Bruno Fernandes coming in. So they got a bit of some real attack and punch from the midfield, something maybe Chelsea are a little lacking on, but that's going to be probably the most fascinating run-in from here on is the battle for 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And it might not matter because Man City's Champions League thing might not come through. So 5th place might be Champions League anyway. But chuck Leicester City into the mix, who are currently 3rd but seem to be falling off a bit. And there you go. You got a bit of an interesting one there. I don't know how I would sort of categorize the rest of the thing. I think a lot of teams like Sheffield United are a very innovative team. tactically, which is why you see like they're a team that don't have a lot of big name players, but everything's very well organized. Whereas Arsenal maybe perhaps going through a bit of a rebuilding phase at the moment, don't have a great identity to what they do. So, and Tottenham are run head first from Pochettino to Mourinho, so there's a bit of a clash of styles going on there as well. So a lot of it in football is reflective of your manager, and a lot of it is dependent on the kind of players that you have. And so I don't know that there's like a distinctive Premier League style, but there are sort of some, like the Premier League is a very fast-paced league. It tends to be like you've got a pretty good standard because there's so much money in that league. So even the lower clubs are outbidding like the teams battling relegation in the Premier League are outbidding clubs who are like battling for Champions League places in Spain for players and stuff like that in the transfer market. So the standard's very high. That just means like anyone can beat anyone and that sort of NRL type thing on their day. City lost to Southampton yesterday, didn't they? So there's one for you. Chelsea lost to West Ham the other day, and like I don't know that there's like a style that pervades in terms of like playing style, but there's definitely styles in terms of like the power and the sort of the money involved in the Premier League, and there's the branding of the Premier League, and those kind of things definitely pervade like top down. Otherwise, it's an individual team kind of thing. I don't know if that's your 5-minute little breakdown, exactly what you're hoping for, but it's the closest I can get to.
Fair dinkum. That is, I'm sure they'll educate a lot of people. It does seem a bit more segmented or compartmentalized compared to the NRL, where it's all fairly like there are more stylistic trends across the league, and it's not necessarily as coach related as football. That was kind of like every rugby league team is going to play a slightly different style based on their coach, but I think the manager is far more influential in the what your team is doing. And I think there's more variety in what Premier League teams are doing and how they play their football, as opposed to how rugby league teams in the NRL are playing rugby league, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, I get what you mean, and I'd suggest that's probably a case of like football has just a lot more influences to it. So you get, for example, like there's one of the things I realized looking at some of the stuff around Liverpool winning is that an English manager has never won the Premier League since it became the Premier League. Obviously, back in the day, it happened basically all the time, but like since the big sort of corporate push of the Premier League in sort of, I think it was 92, 93, something like that. So not quite 30 years, but nearing that. You've had a couple Scottish managers winning, obviously one in particular won a whole bunch of them. A Portuguese fella's won a few, Frenchman's won a couple, etc. Quite a lot of Italians, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly looking at it, most of them with Chelsea, but one of them with Leicester City. So that's like there's that outside influence, whereas in the NRL, it's very Australia-centric, right? There's a lot of cultural stuff coming out of like just the way the NRL has grown and developed over the years, the sort of heritage of it, and also just the way things are like, I mean, it's predominantly Australian players. There's a lot of obviously Polynesian and New Zealand influence, probably an increasing English influence as well, just in recent years, but it's still very much like Aussie old boys club in a lot of ways, whereas the Premier League, a lot of those like managers kind of implementing different stylistic things are coming from around the world and bringing different ideas, and just football is a more global sport that's been around for long enough that it's had like a lot of it's sort of like how languages develop, you know, where like civilizations are like pre-technology making everything connected. Civilizations just grew up on their own, developed their own words for things and their own sounds and whatever, their own cultures basically, and then now we can learn all these different languages on an app. But like they developed on their own because they were sort of isolated. And you had a lot of football like that where it's really only the last 30 years, maybe not even, well, yeah, about 30 years, where like players have played sort of irrespective of their countries, and you see this in Premier League lineups. You look at just the nationalities of the teams, right? And, whereas back in the 60s, it would have just been all British players, basically, with one or two stragglers from elsewhere. Now it's, especially at the top teams, you've got less of an English and British influence, which is, I mean, that's probably changing at the moment because there have been some restrictions. But anyway, like just the Premier League in particular, more than probably any other league in the world, is very open to outside influences, which is probably why that's like not a cohesive kind of stylistic thing like that, which even still to this day, I would suggest you still see that, I think, in like Germany, very technical, like technical, fast flowing kind of style. Italy generally would have like strong defenses, very well organized kind of stuff. Spain, a lot of passing and moving, and sort of in keeping with that Guardiola type stuff, but obviously in a different implementation when you're working with players below the standard of, Lionel Messi. So I think you still see that in some other countries in the same way as you sort of see in NRL, maybe not in England just because of the nature of the Premier League. Also, probably a factor that we'll talk about a little bit when we talk about like NRL style plays is I think the rules of the game are a little more influential to these things in rugby league as well. I don't know if you'd disagree with that, but it seems like a lot of the stuff that people are talking about with how this season is going tends to be framed around the rule changes and the ruck penalties and things like that, right? And that's probably a significant contributing factor in all this too.
There is definitely like a speed of the game factor with the NRL rule change. There's definitely there's this idea that the little blokes are far more prominent now due to that speed, and everyone's wanted that, bring the little playmakers back into play and all that stuff. I never felt like the little blokes were out of the game, because you go back a few, like before this current rule change, Luke Keary was still an amazing player. Like before this rule change, Damien Cook was still the most potent threat out of dummy half. Cameron Smith isn't big. Thurston, Cronk, they're not big. They're little blokes. So the little bloke has always done pretty well in the NRL if you're up for it. Like if you've got the skill set, if you've got the toughness and mentality, there's definitely room for you in the NRL. So I don't agree with that idea, but the simple conclusion to make is definitely that the game is faster and it's more, it feels more free flowing. But other than that, I've just gone through like team stats and seeing who's where in team stats. I don't have like a scientific study on this. This is just some brief look through, and there doesn't appear to be like a specific correlation between any like aspect of play. There is one, which I'll get to, but like you go to offloads, the Broncos are 4th in offloads, the Titans are 5th in offloads, and they're currently not very good. So it's just hard to draw a correlation between offloads and success, given that. Tackle breaks. Broncos are 7th in tackle breaks. And sure, there's mostly good teams in that. Well, the Dragons are 5th. And the West Tigers are 2nd. So it's not strictly the best teams have the most tackle breaks either. So most of the stats go along that line. Or just check in with dummy half runs as well. West Tigers are 1st. Wouldn't classify them as one of the best NRL teams. Titans are 10th. Dragons are 9th. Bulldogs are 8th. Warriors are 7th. Broncos are 6th. Cowboys are 5th. That's dummy half runs. So speed of the game's increasing. Quick dummy halves should be the major factor in the NRL. Well, they're not. The West Tigers have Harry Grant, and he leads. The Tigers lead dummy half runs, and you can see that Harry Grant's really good at rugby league and he's really good at operating in dummy half. The Storm have Cameron Smith, and they're second in dummy half runs, well, first, a lot of those dummy half runs might come from outside backs. And the best dummy halves are going to be the most active out of dummy half. I think that's a fair statement to make as well, because you look at the Raiders, they're third, they have Josh Hodgson. Rabbitohs are fourth, they have Damien Cook. But that top 10 for dummy half runs isn't like a calling card of the NRL's best teams. So there's not much of a correlation between dummy half running and success in the 2020 NRL. And all of that is to say it's just like that, where there's no hard correlation between those stats and the successful teams in the NRL. But then you get to post-contact meters, and the top 10 for post-contact meters: Eels, Roosters, Panthers, Knights, Storm, Raiders, Seagulls. And then you get to the Cowboys. I would suggest that most of the Cowboys' post-contact meters come from Jason Taumalolo himself, considering, let me just pull this up to see which players are leading post-contact meters. Taumalolo's first, he's got 600. So there's not too many other Cowboys in the top 20 for post-contact meters. So that's where they're getting most of their post-contact meters from.
He missed a game in there too as well.
He sure did. So he's like, literally guess.
That's
given
ridiculous.
That Jason Taumalolo, the Tongan, South Auckland Rhino, he is first in post-contact meters wildcard, and he's played 7 games. So I'm going to give you a guess. Based on that Taumalolo factor, who is the only other player in post-contact meters who has only played 7 games? And think about why I'm asking you this question, given how I feel about Jason Taumalolo.
I don't know. That just almost made it more complicated for me to think about. I'm wondering. I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna call back to some of our other podcasts in recent times, and then gonna go old young buck at the Titans, Fotuaika. Am I close?
That's a very good guess. That's a very good guess, but it is Siosua Tokiaho, the Otara Scorpions Jr. So you've got Tokiaho, the Otara Scorpions Jr., and you've got Taumalolo, the Papakura Otahu Jr., both in the top 10 for post-contact meters, and they've only played 7 games. Everyone else has played 8 games, and there is Taumalolo, Whanua Blake, and Tokiaho, all in the top 10. All in the top 7. And they're all in the Tongan team, as is Daniel Tupou. So 4 of the top 7 are Tongan internationals in post-contact meters in the NRL this season. So I believe post-contact meters is the most important thing in the NRL at the moment. I think that's my ultimate conclusion stylistically with the NRL. With the rule changes, it is post-contact meters and the ability, well, this is the literal definition of post-contact meters, the ability to make meters after contact, which is all power. It's all those guys, Taumalolo, Whanua Blake, Tokiaho, Payne Haas is there, James Fisher-Harris is there. I think James Fisher-Harris is the fact that James Fisher-Harris is one of the best middle forwards in the NRL, I don't think that's a surprise with the current rules and how the NRL is played at the moment, because Fisher-Harris, he's super mobile. Taumalolo, Fisher-Harris, and Tokiaho have all played as an edge forward in the NRL. That's a key factor, key note. Tokiaho was a centre at the Warriors. Then he went to the Roosters, played a bit of edge, and they just turned him into a middle forward. Taumalolo coming through the grades, he was an edge forward. And then 1 year he gets moved to the middle, game over. Fisher-Harris, primarily an edge forward early in his career. Then he started to, mid-game, he would switch between edge and middle as part of a substitute rotation. Now he's just a middle forward. That's the NRL these days. And sure, Saifidi, Clemmer, I like what they're doing through the middle. And you need, for a Tokiaho, you need a Wairea Hargraves. Jason Taumalolo in the grand final run for the Cowboys, there was also Matt Scott. So it's not just all about those super mobile middle forwards. You need Fisher Harris has James Tamo alongside him. So you need the more rugged, prototypical middle forward, and then you need your mobile middle forward as well. So it's an interesting one because the little blokes have always been a huge factor, and they are currently a huge factor. Like you look at someone like Luke Keary, how the fuck he is arguably the best player in the NRL, given his size and stature. That's amazing. The fact that Brandon Smith plays as a middle forward, not quite so much last week because they had Cameron Smith was playing in the half, so Brandon Smith played hooker. But his main job at the Storm, as long as Cameron Smith is at dummy half, Brandon Smith plays as a middle forward. Again, that tells you about the speed and power and mobility that is required in the middle forward these days. And I've heard a couple of coaches say like just leg speed, like how fast you're moving across the ground and how many because think about it, post-contact meters, you make contact and then it's about keeping your feet moving. So your feet have to keep moving, stay engaged. You don't just take the hit and stand still. So it's all about foot speed and agility and mobility in the NRL these days.
That certainly makes a lot of sense. And I guess also if you're you just ran through why some of those like dummy half runs and stuff like that are perhaps overrated statistics just because of the way they fit into the narrative about the rule changes, and maybe that's not exactly like the actual like result of what we're seeing. But as with all statistics, like I think about when you look at possession statistics in football sometimes, like this team has 75% possessions. Like, yeah, but how many shots did they have? Like, if you have 75% possession and you draw 0-0, you didn't really do enough with the ball, did you? Like, and when some players like get, celebrated because it's like they made 100 passes in this game and like 95% accuracy. It's like, but how many of those were just like 6-yard passes sideways or going backwards to your center backs or whatever? Like how effective were, like you get a lot of empty stats like that, let alone when you get into like American sports where you start talking about like garbage time stats and things like that. So there's the stats and there's how you use the stats, and like post-contact meters is an effective stat regardless because it shows you're dominating the ruck, and that's obviously a major factor right now when you're talking about like the ruck penalties having changed the style of play to at least a little bit. Maybe hasn't changed the way teams play, but it's certainly changed the speed, at least the pace of the game. In a positive way, I think most people are saying as well. And if you are like charging through, dominating the tackle, getting an extra 5 meters, 10 meters, 15 meters, maybe even falling forward, getting a quick play of the ball, that is also when your dummy half runs come in extremely handy afterwards because you've created that space for them. You've burst that little pocket for them to be able to run through. Whereas if you're falling backwards in the tackle every time and you're getting up slowly, defensive line is pushing up on you before your first receivers even got the ball, and you're just not going to go very far. How do the Warriors shape up on some of those? Do the Warriors have any players up near the top in those post-contact stats and stuff?
The Warriors have Tohu Harris. He is 13th in post-contact meters, and Tuivasa-Sheck's 15th. The only thing about the Warriors is errors. They are 13th in errors, which is pretty damn impressive, like considering everyone's stereotypical view of the Warriors is that they make a lot of errors and they throw the footy around. Well, they're 13th in errors and they don't offload the footy. So they don't make many errors because they're not pushing the footy through offloads. So that's kind of it for the Warriors. Like the Warriors just don't do enough. They're not making line breaks, that's for sure. They're 15th in line breaks. So, and they just don't do enough to really be like a notable point in this discussion about style in the NRL, if that makes sense, because they're just trying to keep up. And there's teams who are trying to keep up, and there's teams who are pushing the style forward. Some teams are just trying to hang in games by completing sets, and set completion is actually an interesting one because the Warriors are 4th, completing sets at 81%. The Dragons are 8th, completing sets at 78%. Like, sure, there's the Titans and Broncos have the worst completion rate, but it's all spread. So it's again, it's not hard and concrete, just like blatant evidence. But there's those teams who are just trying to complete sets, build pressure, and hang in. That's pretty much who's doing that? Warriors, Dragons, Broncos, Titans, and Bulldogs. I'd chuck the Cowboys in there because I'll get to that. I've got an interesting question for you here, Wildcard, regarding the Cowboys. But the Cowboys, Warriors, Dragons, Broncos, Titans, and Bulldogs, they're just trying to keep up. They're just trying to complete their sets, make their tackles, and it's all effort, and that's how I imagine their plan is for those games. Whereas you look at further up the ladder, they are adjusting their style to suit their opposition, especially the Roosters and Storm, who I still believe are the best teams regardless of the Eels and Panthers being up the top. But the Eels, Panthers, Storm, Knights, Roosters, lesser extent the Raiders, and Sharks and West Tigers, but those top 5 teams, they're attacking with variety, they're throwing the footy around, they're exciting to watch, they bust their ass on defense, they're forcing the opposition's hand with their defense, so they're using defensive tactics to their advantage compared to those other teams who are just trying to keep up. The thought I had here, Wildcard, you look at Jason Taumalolo and Payne Haas, they're effectively marquee forwards. Taumalolo has like a 10-year deal with the Cowboys. Payne Haas is I don't know what his deal is at the moment, but he's a highly talented, and he's already played Origin, and the Broncos have gone above and beyond to keep him at the club. But the Cowboys and Broncos aren't very good. They're the teams who are trying to keep up. So they are 1st and 4th. Taumalolo's 1st, Payne Haas is 4th in post-contact meters, and they are, I'd imagine, are on rather large deals and take up a rather large section of the salary cap, but their teams aren't winning. Then you look at the other forwards. So there's a couple of backs here, Tupou, as I said, and shout out Brian To'o. He is amazing for the Panthers. He is 6th in post-contact meters, and he's a nuggety little bugger himself. But you look at Adam Fanua-Blake. He's not a marquee player in that forward pack. He's just another piece of the puzzle. James Fisher-Harris, not a marquee piece of the Panthers forward pack. Just another 400, 500K, maybe 600 or 700. But that range. Tokiaho, fits this amazingly. One of the best middle forwards in the game, and he wouldn't be on a big deal at the Roosters. I reckon the Roosters do a great job of getting these players on lesser deals just because of their culture and because of their opportunities they provide. And in the Knights, they have Saifidi and Clemmer. Clemmer's a marquee forward and he's on a big deal, but you've also got Saifidi there, right next to him in the post-contact meters. So that's interesting in the sense, Wildcard, that the two highest paid of that group in the top of the post-contact meters, Jason Taumalolo and Payne Haas, they're the 2 of the highest paid, I'd reckon, in that group. And they're in the top 5 for post-contact meters, but their teams aren't very good. And then the other forwards in the top 10 for post-contact meters, they all just do their job in the team, in a sense of getting their post-contact meters, but also in a sense of know your value, know your role and what you offer the club, but you're not a marquee 800K plus middle forward who is impacting the salary cap in a way that decisions have to be made elsewhere. That's what I mean in piece of the puzzle, is that there's less of an impact elsewhere and it just fits into what that team requires.
which is the nature of the salary cap, isn't it? Is you've got you need to be able to retain those kind of superstar players, but you also need to be able to build a team around them. And so there's a balancing act between like how much can we afford to give this dude, while also making sure we're not just wasting their prime by not being able to put the best players around them at the same time. And it's tricky. Like there's probably a little bit more of a divergent thing compared to what we're talking about, but like I just saw this morning that Patrick Mahomes from the Kansas City Chiefs, Super Bowl winning quarterback, was start of this year, wasn't it? Just signed a 10-year deal worth something close to, like, if he hits all his targets and wins a couple more Super Bowls and whatever, it could be worth close to like $500 million by the end of that decade, which is absolutely incredible. I haven't looked any further than just a couple like Adam Schefter tweets at the start, but I'm assuming that's probably the richest contract ever handed out to an NFL player. And then the first thing I thought of was Jason Taumalo for the same reason, because he obviously signed a 10-year deal himself at that point where he was breaking through as like a generational talent. And it's quite different in the NFL when you're talking about a quarterback, because the quarterback, just more than any other position, has so much influence on the result of games. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know, I kind of worry for the players in that situation. Like, it's cool, you get your like long-term security, but then it also reminds you of that Scottie Pippen story from The Last Dance, where like he was so desperate for that long-term security, especially coming from quite a difficult childhood and upbringing and whatever, just like poverty-wise. He wanted that long-term security, signed a long-term deal, which by the end of the deal meant he, like, with the explosion in the value of NBA contracts, largely perpetuated by his buddy Michael Jordan, and just the fame and the sponsorship of deals and the global marketing ability that he brought to the league. Like, that contract, by the end of it, he was getting like criminally underpaid. He made up for it later on in his career, but it just shows like the way those things go. And I suspect Patrick Mahomes, by the end of his 10-year deal, will also be somewhat underpaid, and I wonder if that'll be the case for Jason Taumalo as well. We're still I don't even think we're halfway through that deal, are we? So we're still a while away from finding out how those things work. Little spanner in the works with the old pandemic as well, in terms of just the sort of upward trajectory of all these salary caps. But funky little divergent path there on how like these long-term contracts work, because you could also like I don't see why, if you're, I understand it from anyone below superstar level, but if you are in that absolute superstar level, you can probably, I mean, it's a risk in terms of injuries and whatever, but someone like LeBron James, you see, just signs 1+1 deals everywhere. Like, 1 year with a player option for the second year, and then he can opt out and get a bigger deal if the money's there. It gives him a little bit of security. It's probably something you really want to only do in the back end of your career anyway, but it's all these little wrinkles to these kind of situations. And I did think of Jason Taumalo when I saw Patrick Mahomes had signed a 10-year contract himself.
Taumalo is a very interesting one, wildcard, because what if the Cowboys make the top 8 3 times in that 10-year deal? Is that the desired return on investment that the Cowboys want? I don't know. Like, if you're paying, like, and that leads me to believe, like, well, for me, it's a very difficult discussion, because it's you're trying to assess like which position is the most influential in rugby league. Because you look at the NFL, if you got Patrick Mahomes, the only person you need to worry about paying is Patrick Mahomes. Like, sure, you need a good offensive line, you need like good defense, you need like, but sure, there's other elements that you can do good business in, but NFL is so dependent on the quarterback. If you've got a talent like Patrick Mahomes, your primary objective is ensuring you have Patrick Mahomes on your team. And NBA is also, there's only 5 people on the court, So we've seen through the San Antonio Spurs, and you look at the LA Lakers now, how they have they have LeBron, they have Anthony Davis, but they also have a few nice pieces around them. You look at the Cleveland Cavaliers team that won, it was Kyrie Irving, it was Kevin Love. So definitely there's other people involved, but in the NBA there's only 5 people on the court, so it makes it very clear. It's less about like what position is most important, and it's more about what talent is most influential. But then you come to the NRL where like paying a lot of money for a middle forward doesn't guarantee you success. Paying a lot of money for a halfback doesn't guarantee you success either, because it's all about fit. It's all about so many other factors. Because you look at someone like Ash Taylor, paid a lot of money, bit of a non-factor in the NRL now. So, and the Gold Coast Titans would have done that because they're like, holy shit, here's a good halfback. Let's pay him lots of money because he's a halfback and he's quite good. And we need that kind of player in our club right now. But it's just so hard to pinpoint the most influential position in an NRL team. And going back to the post-contact meters, I think it's more about finding the combinations. So it's less about having one Jason Taumalolo in your team, and it's more about having Adam Whenua, Blake and Marty Tapau and Jake Trbojevic. It's more about having James Fisher-Harris, James Tamo, Isaac Yeo, Viliami Kikau. It's more about having 2 Saifidi twins and a David Clemmer, and then next year a Tyson Frizzell. You look at the Sharks, they've got Aaron Woods, they've got Andrew Fafita, they've got Wade Graham, and then they've got these young forwards that are so impactful. The Roosters, Tokiaho, Wairea Hargraves, Victor Radley when he's healthy. And then they've just got this list. They've got Lindsay Collins, they've got Nat Butcher, they've got Satili Tuponuia, they've got Pawasa Famasili, all these other dudes. So it's like, it's just hard to read like where you want to put your money in an NRL salary cap, where you want to invest. And I think it's more aligned with the NBA actually, where it's like, you just need the right talent. It doesn't matter what position they are in. You just need the right talent and the right combinations of different talents to build your team. And because you look at the Broncos, like, I think it would be very easy for the Broncos to say, look, we've got a super young team, let's rebuild, a la the Newcastle Knights. And that would just be a great thing for everyone involved because everyone can chill the fuck out. And the reason they're not very good is because their forward pack is Payne Haas, it is Patrick Carrigan, it is Flegler, it's all these young forwards who don't know what to do in the NRL.
Yes.
Compared to Marty Tapau, Jake Trbojevic, Adam Whenua, Blake. They've all been around. They all know everything about the NRL. James Tamo, Wairea Hargraves, all those names I mentioned, David Clemmer, their experienced Grizzly NRL forwards who are very good at what they do. And the Broncos, like, have invested in a lot of young talent, but it's not conducive with winning games right now. And that's all good. You just got to be upfront, clear with your intentions, what stage you're at as a club. But again, that's just another point. Like, it's far more important to have, it's a tricky one because you got to pay players like what they're worth to keep them, but it's also like, I would definitely steer clear of paying a player unless it's a transcendent talent like a Kalen Ponga. Kalen Ponga deserves to have the money that he's on, and I think the way Kalen Ponga impacts the game of footy, he impacts it in every aspect of the game. Playmaking at the line, defense, his just skill set is adaptable to like everywhere on the footy park, and you combine that with his attitude and effort, and that's where you get your value for money. But there's not too many dudes like that, and maybe it's all about the fullback position actually. Because you think about the ways that a fullback is involved in a game. If I had $1 million to spend, I would look for one of the best fullbacks, and then you can just buy the right players elsewhere to ensure that the job gets done. But if you've got a great fullback, he impacts the game defensively. we've all heard how Billy Slater was an amazing defensive fullback in the same way that Kalen Ponga is, through their effort to get to a play, shut that play down, whether it's a kick getting out of the end zone, whether it's a defensive tackle, a defensive read. But in Billy Slater's case, it was all about his communication, and he was telling his defensive line the play the opposition were going to do, so then the players in the defensive line are ready, and it's easy to deal with. But that's because Billy Slater's there, he's watching, he's communicating clearly what is going to happen. And I think Kalen Ponga can get to that level, but that takes experience, and again, that's just to the value of a fullback, because they can impact the game so drastically defensively. You think of a middle forward, they're just going to make a tackle, might put a big shot on, that's cool, changes the momentum and that, but if you've got a fullback at the peak of his powers, like a James Tedesco as well, because the Roosters are a great team, they can impact the game defensively just by watching the game and communication. Then they have their effort plays to get in front of the footy, and they're a third half. Like one of the most interesting things is seeing how halves and fullbacks play in the NRL, because you've got, one team might have a left half and a right half, and then the fullback in the middle. The Warriors use Roger Tuivasa-Sheck as the right half. They use Cody Nikorima as the left half. They have Blake Green in the middle. Some teams just connect. You got, like, Luke Keary just goes everywhere. James Tedesco, they just go everywhere. They just look for the opportunity. Tom Trbojevic is literally wherever the ball is, he's there. And then he might go left, he might go right, be part of a few plays. So, I started off thinking like there wasn't a position that requires dramatic investment from your NRL salary cap, and then I finished that with an idea that fullback is the most likely to be that position.
Yeah, but even still, I don't think too many people would argue that Jason Taumalolo can be is worthy of being a foundational piece in a NRL roster. It's just like, you can't, well, you already said this, like, you can't only have that guy, you have to put players around them, and then sometimes you just get to that point where if you haven't, like, if your young guys didn't come through and develop the way you hoped, or there just aren't enough of them there, if some of your sort of, mid-salary type acquisitions just didn't live up to their potential, maybe that you bought them a little too late in their careers, or maybe they just didn't turn things around the way they hoped, or whatever. Like, you got to be able to get some of those. When you look at, like, I think the deepest NBA roster we've seen in a long time is that Golden State Warriors one, and they get a lot of, like, it was like signing Kevin Durant obviously is the big focal point, but they also like had an incredible bench of players like Andre Iguodala, for example, who was just always a little bit of an underrated guy who they convinced to take, and it wasn't easy as well. There was a bit of resistance there, but eventually Steve Kerr got him to take that sixth man role, and it just changed the whole flow of that team, because it meant they were never off. And then also, like, Andrew Bogut, for example, didn't play huge minutes in a lot of those final series, but also was an important defensive piece in particular. Coming off a lot of injuries in his career. Sean Livingston was the same. They helped sort of regenerate his career. Like, you've got to have those kind of reclamation prospects as well. You've got to be able to get value above the dollars and find which players aren't going to be worth as much money as they should. Can we get them and then get them playing above that value kind of thing? Like, you got to be able to do all those things. It's a big juggling act, as well as also finding that kind of those foundational type pieces. Where this gets interesting on a hypothetical one as well is if you look at a club like the Cowboys and wonder, like, obviously it's all a little bit simpler when you just look at the way that NRL contracts function. But if this was an NBA situation where, like, trades were a possibility, you kind of wonder, like, what would... Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of money left on that contract, but he's also an outstanding player, and I don't think a team like the Dragons, for example, would hesitate to chuck, for example, a highly paid half who isn't quite delivering and maybe needs to change the scenery, as well as a couple good young players, because they seem to have too many to be able to fit in the team as it is anyway. I think the team like the Dragons would happily get someone of that ability and chuck a whole lot of good talent back your way. No draft picks, obviously, in this hypothetical, because we can only take it so far on a hypothetical depth. But if that were a function of the NRL, like that kind of trade bait kind of thing, I would be just a little bit curious to wonder what the Cowboys would be thinking. I don't think they'd want to trade him, but at the same time, I think there's still a lot of value there. So it's one of those, yeah, I mean, it's hypothetical, but it's an interesting kind of angle to think of it from.
It is indeed, and what you're describing with the Dragons, just like separate to the trade, but that's a team chasing, right? That's like all those teams who are chasing, or they're playing catch up
for sure
on the field. They're also playing catch up off the field, because the two are, there is a correlation between the two. There is a connection between the two, because your performances sell the club. Players enjoying their footy sell the club. So players go to the Roosters on less money because they can see that they're going to have fun playing their footy, and they have stories from other players like about the professionalism, or players getting faster and healthier at the Roosters. So all of those things go into the package of helping you get players for less money. But then if you're one of the clubs playing catch-up, you're playing catch-up on the field, stylistically and physically and all that stuff. I suspect you're probably playing catch-up in terms of like implementing the latest technology as well. So, getting all the recovery stuff, pinpoint, and, cryotherapy, and being on top of meditation and yoga, like leading all that stuff, you're probably playing catch up in that regard. And then you're probably playing catch up as far as building your roster goes, because you're trying to catch up to the way footy is played first and foremost. And then a couple years later, you can start to build your roster. So you're years behind at that stage. So I think the catch-up idea, trying to catch up, it's all-encompassing. And that's not a good thing, because you just think about how, writing about the Warriors, I think about how the Warriors can get out of this. And you're a Dragons fan, so you're thinking about how the Dragons can get out of this. And when you start to think about the magnitude of their need to catch up, it's going to take a while. It's going to, a couple of things have to change drastically to catch up, because the Roosters keep moving forward, the Melbourne Storm keep moving forward. Those clubs are, regardless of the style of play, regardless of what is happening in the world, to be honest, the Melbourne Storm and Roosters have a pretty strong record of being notable factors in the NRL. So they're always looking forward, they're always pushing the boundaries. So if you're a club trying to catch up, you might catch up to that point, but then the Storm and Roosters are going to be a couple points ahead. So that's the very interesting wildcard. And we've talked a lot about style, and you've done a lot of Flying Kiwis work. You've published your Flying Kiwis thing here. As always, weekly, wrapping up the Kiwi footballers, men and women, doing their thing around the world. So you've got a lot of international players, Sarpreet Singh, Joe Bell. Who else do we have there? Betsy Hassett doesn't play in the American League, so shout out to her. Elijah Just, Dalton Wilkins, couple of names there that you're busting down. But we've got a pretty hearty core of footballers in America, and I think we've done a pretty damn fine job so far intertwining like the updates on the sport with the style of play. So if you can thread the needle there with the Kiwi footballers in America in the NWSL, what does that stand for? Northern Women's Soccer League? National Women's Soccer League.
Close enough.
National Women's Soccer League. I was looking for a Northern America, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So we've got a bunch of Kiwi footballers in America. take someone like start with Abby Erceg, for example, and if you can take this forward to the whole crew of Kiwi women doing their thing in America, what's happening with her? So Abby Erceg, she plays for North Carolina, one of the best players in the competition, one of the best teams in the competition. Do you see any, like, how are you assessing Abby Erceg style of football, what she's good at, what she's doing at the moment with regards to the NSSL, which was one of the first competitions to come back after the pandemic? So same NRL vibe there. You've got a post-pandemic restart. What's happening? What are you seeing? How are you feeling about Abby Erceg and then the rest of those Kiwi wahine in the big USA?
Yeah, the NWSL was the first league in America as far as team sports go to come back, and this is a factor in it because they also maybe were a little. They've got a new commissioner. They're very desperate to sort of capitalize on something that's never really happened before for domestic football in America, and that's kind of like feeding it to just somehow tap into the immense fandom that their national team has. The women's league doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily flowing on down into the club stuff as well, and part of that is this is just my own theory, but I think that just those national women's players for America haven't always had the best buy-in themselves with some of these clubs. Like, you even see a couple of them aren't playing at the moment. Just for, there's some, to be fair, relatively legitimate concerns about the fact that this whole tournament is going to be played on artificial surface, short turnarounds, etc., etc. There's also a more, not selfish, but personal goal orientated, we'll say, target of the Olympics next year and wanting to be fit for that as well and not wanting to risk things when it's already a little bit of a compromised thing. But see, that's the case with most of these sports leagues. Pretty much all of them that have come back at this point, they're compromised to some level. It's a matter of, do you want to play the sport or not? And Abby Erceg did a bit of media stuff after her previous game, and she basically said this. She's like, they asked her what it's like living in the bubble, and she said, well, it's not ideal, it's not the easiest, but we do what we can to be able to have a season, to be able to do what we do professionally. We want to play football. This is what we're here to do. We'll do what it takes in order to make that possible. And I think that's sort of that's probably the stylistic thread with Abby Erceg to look through, is just what an intense leader she is. Her coach tweeted out a photo of her after warm-ups before the previous game, carrying the water bottles in and saying, this is a captain, the leader of the team, doesn't have to be the person doing this. There are coaches and reserves and whatever who would have done it otherwise, but just leading by example in that way. And that's very much how she plays as well. There was a moment sort of early on in their most recent game as well, which was against Chicago, and it was 0-0 sort of 20 minutes in, and one of the other centre back gets dispossessed, and then players running through, and Erceg comes sprinting over to get a challenge and doesn't win the ball, but at least does enough to disrupt the shot to where it goes straight at the keeper, is saved. Just the big effort kind of things, the leading by example kind of things. And then she's also extremely proficient at popping up with specifically a headed goal off a set piece. I think I saw a stat that it's in the Flying Kiwis actually. She scored, I think, 6 goals in the NWSL so far in her career, and 5 of them have been headers. And this is what she did this week as well. At 82nd minute or something, they have a corner kick, they take it short, they cut it back, they cross it in from a deeper angle, she beats the offside trap, heads it in off the crossbar, there's your winning goal, they win 1-0. Player of the Day award for Abby Erceg. She's got many of those already in her career, and just sort of it'd be interesting to see what the case would be, since we're talking about hypotheticals before. If she was an American player, if she wasn't a New Zealand international, I think she'd be extremely well celebrated as I don't know if I'd say the best defender in the world, because that's always going to be a subjective thing, but she'd certainly be in that conversation a lot more if she was winning World Cups with America. And her centre-back partner at North Carolina is Abby Dahlkemper, who is a starting centre-back for the USA national team, just won the last World Cup and all this. So there's a lot of, there's a direct parallel to be made there as well. And she just continually leads by example, and does incredible things. Has been like captaining that team to, I think, 2 of the last 3 championships. They also won the one before that when they weren't in North Carolina. They were in Western New York Flash, and their team got bought out and moved. But yeah, like a consistently dominating player in that league, and maybe if she wasn't a New Zealander, would be getting even more credit than she already does. And she is like a Defender of the Year winner at a couple years ago in this competition. But that's our gain. It's just showing a New Zealand footballer doing amazing things. There is also another aspect I was mentioning about some of like how they've had to make like semi compromises. Maybe they've rushed this league back in order to be the first team team sport league back. One of the issues they had was that the Orlando Pride team had a outbreak of coronavirus throughout the squad. I think there were like 6 players and 4 staff members or something like that, all tested positive like a week or 2 out from the start of this competition, which meant they didn't have the time to recover, so they had to pull out of the competition, just one fewer team. And Ellie Riley was meant to be playing for them. So Ellie Riley, captain of the Football Ferns, and in a really awkward situation for her, because she had a pretty happy home at old Rosengård in Sweden, and then left there to go challenge herself at Chelsea. Didn't get the minutes that she hoped for at Chelsea, sort of playing second fiddle there at left back, so she moved to Bayern Munich, and then also found herself in the same situation at Bayern Munich, where she was playing off the bench more often than not, sort of as the alternate player in her position rather than getting those starts. So she moved to America, and her team had to pull out of the league because they had a bit of a Pando episode. And now she's left Orlando Pride, having announced she's going back to Sweden, which I think is probably where she'll end up living after her partner's from Sweden. And she doesn't specify whether she's going to a club or not. It sounds like it might just be she's just going because she's not going to be playing football in America for this season, so might as well just go be with family and whatever. So 1/quarter fewer New Zealanders in the NWSL now because of that, which is unfortunate, but so it goes. Maybe she'll be back at some point in the future, because there were a lot of good vibes about her, because she was, born in America, raised in America, went to college in America. She has a Kiwi father, I think, but she's very much like she's very much of American as well, as one of these complicated modern world things where you can obviously, being from one country doesn't mean you can't have a deep, powerful, meaningful connection to another. She's actually, I can't remember where it was, but there was an interview she spoke kind of really beautifully about what it means to be like, I don't want to say an adopted Kiwi, but something close to that, through the Football Ferns. And yeah, it would have been really cool to see her playing in that competition too, but so it goes. There is still Rosie White and Katie Bowen, both of whom have through their first 2 games of this tournament. And it's a tournament where you play 4 games in the round robin, and then because there's only 8 teams now, they just go straight into quarterfinals from that. First 8, I guess. North Carolina Courage with Abby Erceg, they've won all 3 of their games as of recording. So they're cruising towards their first seed, which is just what they do every season. Utah, I think they drew 1 and they won 1. So they're also hosting it. It's being played in Utah. So they've got a little bit of pressure on them, even without the fans in attendance. Yeah, Katie Bowen started the first game, played sort of an hour or so as a right wing back / right midfielder sort of role. And then played the same role in the second game, coming off the bench though. So I think at halftime, I think she got quite a few minutes, regardless of having to be off the bench. She still got quite minutes in that game. So there's that. There's also Rosie White at the OL Reign, formerly known as the Seattle Reign, but they got bought by Olympique Lyon, the French powerhouse club. They're basically the strongest team, have been for the last decade, strongest women's football club team on the planet. And they're doing the Manchester City thing of buying clubs in other leagues around the world. So I Don't know what the ethics of that are, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. Rosie White played off the bench in one of their games as they struggled to a 0-0 draw. She was chucked on near the end, bring a bit of energy. Couldn't quite score that winning goal, though, as she actually did a couple times last season. Popped up with crucial goals and 1-0 wins. And then she started the second game in a more advanced midfield role. Went off semi-injured with about half an hour to go. Ice pack strapped to her leg afterwards. Hopefully nothing too bad that'll keep her out of future games. She went down injured, got some treatment, got back up, went back on to carry on the game, but then got subbed off in a triple sub straight after. So maybe a little precautionary there. She was going to carry on. And the Reign drew their first game, and I think they lost their second game, so they're a little lower down the old seedings. But it's a bit similar to the Kiwi NBL, where it doesn't really matter where you finish as long as you don't finish 8th, because you finish 8th, you'll play North Carolina in the quarterfinals. But everyone does make the playoffs, so everyone gets that sort of backup line. But definitely, as far as some of these footy leagues around the world go, the American women's stuff is pretty hot property for some top flying Kiwis action, and has been for a couple years. And Abby Erceg continually leading the way as she does in most aspects with that. And give them a big old focus. And it's also quite interesting because Rosie White did some media stuff as well after her previous game, or maybe before, I forget which, but same as Abby Erceg, both of them got asked that question about the World Cup hosting coming down here, and I think that's both of them also had the same answer, which was just what a boost it's going to be to the sport in New Zealand. And this is part of that, is following that path and seeing how because you don't just turn up to a World Cup and hope to do well because you're hosting. You got to put a bit of resource into it, beforehand, and make sure everyone's chugging along at building towards that kind of, peak performance at that host thing when the spotlight is on. And there is a good core. I was thinking about this with the Ferns. They've had a few retirements in recent years, but there is a very strong core. The majority of that team from the World Cup last year, not too many more of them are going to be retiring before 2023. So there is a strong sort of unit of a team there building towards that World Cup. Rosie White will definitely be amongst it. Hopefully Abby Erceg will be in amongst it. She said she wants to. It's just a matter of fitness and being, body holding up through the years, whatever. 3 more years is hard to predict, but she's not she's only about 30 now. She's one of the fittest players in the team, so I don't think that'll be an issue. But yeah, also just that is gonna be for the next 3 years. It's gonna be we put a nice little spotlight right here on some of the Kiwi players playing, the Kiwi women playing in America, and that is gonna be a spotlight for all Kiwi female footballers over the next few years, is building towards that World Cup and how that whole thing's gonna shake out too.
Beauty, we've got very interesting times with the Women's World Cup. I was taking a look at some White Ferns player contracts as well, and got down a path of thinking about how they might look for their World Cup next year, early Feb. So a couple of interesting female Kiwi Sporting matters there to keep an eye on building into 2021, when I imagine everything will be going gangbusters. We'll wrap it up there, wild card, and we'll pop back later in the week to see what has gone down in the Kiwi sports world. Thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the wild weather. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Cha-cha-cha.